So please welcome Robert de Laat, aka Laat.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Is it a problem if I talk in English? I don't know. Yeah, no problem. Okay, perfect. Well, good that you're all here. It's quite a good turnout for the first one of today. Let me turn off my cell phone myself to avoid any disturbance. Okay, quick check. Who here works with Logic? Okay, and who works with Ableton? Fruity Loops? Any Fruity Loops? Okay, Bitwig? Any Bitwig? Cubase? Anybody? Okay, well first let me start off. Doesn't matter which one you use. I use them. I myself use Ableton, Logic, and Bitwig. So it doesn't really matter which one, which workstation you use. You can. They basically do everything the same, but just a little different. It's like cooking in your own kitchen or at a friend's house. It's basically the same. It's just a different way of working. So and just out of curiosity, who has been producing here for? Who's just okay? Who's advanced? Who's advanced level, kind of? Okay. Who's kind of in the beginner stage, just trying to figure out how everything works? Okay, and who's full-blown worldwide touring DJ at the moment? Okay, I like that. That's well. Okay. Well, the things that I'm going to show you, first let me introduce myself. My name is Robert. I produce music under the name Laat. I've been producing for roughly 10 years, and since 2 years I've been also releasing music. There's quite a gap between that stage. I've released at Elevate from Pig and Dan, and also recently I've released on Tronic, Christian Smith's label. And I got a new track coming out in April, also on Tronic, so look out for that. The things that I'm going to be showing you today is you can do in every computer program. So it's just more about the technique, so don't worry if I show you a plugin that you don't have. Just try to pay attention to the techniques, and then I'm sure you'll figure it out yourself. On the website, I've listed quite a lot of things that I wanted to discuss today. If I don't have the time to cover all that, don't worry. Just go to my website, Laat Live, and then you'll end up at my YouTube channel as well, where I've started, because I got asked for this seminar, I've started a vlog where I'll be showing you tips and tricks on how to produce music and how I make my own tracks. So let's get started. I am not a professional DJ in the sense that I do this full time. I have a normal job during the week, like most of you guys. So if I'm in the studio, I want to be as effective as possible straight away. So I don't want to waste any time. So every morning I get up at 6, crunch in 2 hours of studio time before I go to work. And when I do that, I don't want to be hassling around with settings and searching for samples. I just want to be quick and dirty and get my ideas out right away. So one of the things that I like to do is in Ableton, it's quite a cool trick, is a quicker way to select samples. So I've created here a loop. It's just a standard beat. Can everybody hear this correctly, or does it have to be a little bit louder? Okay, a little bit louder if possible. Yeah. I think this is good, yeah. So now I want to add a hi-hat to it. So if I go to my current project, samples, and for example, I like this hi-hat. Wait, got it.
So do you also have your kicks ready for yourself?
No. I have some that I like, but sometimes I build them from scratch. But yeah, sometimes I build my own samples, but for this example, I just use from a sample pack, so it doesn't matter which one. This one is not named, but you can use any sample pack that you want. So for example, we load in a so we have this hi-hat now. And you think, okay, I don't really like this one, let's select a different one. So what you can do is you can drop it in, drag it in, or you can hot swap it. So you can play it. But what I don't like is that I have to click now every time to go to the next sample. So what you can do, you can create from this sampler. If you go to the right mouse button, you can make a sampler out of it. And you can load in multiple samples in a bank. So in this case, I select all my 50 hi-hats, copy them in. And now when I play it, it will play all these 50 hi-hats at the same time. So it doesn't make any sense. If you like that one, you can keep it, of course. But if you go here to selection, and you click here, distribute ranges equally. Now, I hope I'm not going too fast. You can go through this sampler to select the sample that you want. And what we can even do is create a macro for that. So if you say here group track, and you click here, you can go to macros. Yeah, it's on the screen, good. And you can map that, the first one, to this sample selector. So now I can close this down and just have my loop going, and I can scroll here through all these 50 samples that I just loaded in. And if you can do this for shakers, you can do this for snares, you can even do this for kicks. And if you save this and load it up, you can really quickly get your IDs out by you can even map this to a little MIDI controller and just play around with it. So you can very quickly get the IDs out there that you want. And for me, this was, when I discovered this in Ableton, you can also do this in Bitwig, for example, it really sped up my workflow. So let's see, I have... oh yeah, this one is good as well. So I've been a visitor here for the Dancefair every year so far, and this is the first time I'm speaking. And I also go to ADE to sit down as well. And one time I had a one-on-one session with Patrice Baumel, he's a famous techno producer, and it was a couple of years back, so I let him hear my demos, just like you guys. And he said, well, it's really good, and if Joris Voorn or somebody would release this, I'm sure it would sell very well. But you're a nobody, so it has to be better. Well, as you can imagine, quite a tough comment, but he was right. And he told me, like, your productions, you're trying to make techno music, and most techno producers are very fond of hardware machines, and you're producing with only digital. There's always this debate going on, what's better and what's better. In my opinion, the plugins get so powerful right now, your computer power is so strong, you can definitely get that analog feeling yourself, quite advanced. But for drum machines, especially if you look at the 909 and the 808, which are famous drum machines, those are, people always talk about these machines like, oh, they have this certain feel, like they're this analog flavor. And one of the things that is caused by that is these machines, they actually make the sound. They're not samplers that reload a sample every time. They actually make the sound through circuitry. And therefore, every time they generate a kick or a snare or a hi-hat, it's a little bit different. So I was thinking, how can I get that different flavor for every time I hit a sample in my own productions? So I went out and borrowed a lot of hardware machines from my friends and looked online for people who had recordings of hardware's drum machines. And one of the things that I found, for example, here, there was a recording I made of a Vermona, which is a famous analog drum machine. And I just recorded the same clap 16 times. And what you can do in Ableton is you can slice this to a new track, and I've created, for every half bar, I have a clap sound. And now it's all these 16 claps spread out over my drum machine. So it's nice if you can hear it as well. Well, as you can hear, it's not that loud. So I've already created it here before as an example. And now if I show you, just pay attention to this bottom section. This is what I mean. Every sound is the same. But if you look at the wave file, it's a little bit different for every time I selected a different sample. And that is that analog effect, because the drum machine made that sample again. So it's not exactly the same. And you can hear it. For example, here I have... Here I have a simple clap pattern, and it's just loading the same sample every time. This first hit. But what I've done here is I've created a round robin effect, and this is a randomizer in Ableton, and it makes sure that every time I hit the MIDI note, it will select one of these samples at random. So therefore I can kind of generate that effect that you have with a normal analog drum machine. And I'll play the sample again and see if you can pick it up, but it definitely sounds a lot different if you just go through all these different samples. So I'll turn this off and on, and then you'll hear how it is without the round robin effect and how it is with the effect. So this is without, and this is with. Okay, maybe it doesn't come out that well on these speakers, but I'll assure you, if you do this for your hi-hats, for your snares, for your claps, for your kicks, you'll get that analog flavor that is quite often used within techno, and therefore it doesn't sound as sterile as you would have if you just have one sample that you would hit, and now you can do. It sounds a little bit different. So this way you can keep your tracks also a lot more interesting for the ear and pleasing without just having the same sample hitting every time. So I hope I don't go too fast. So raise your hand if you have any questions on it. But we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. So, oh yeah, this one is also good. A lot of times when I'm producing, people ask me like, how do you get your kicks cutting through the mix as effectively as you have in your tracks? Well, it's not always the case, because sometimes I start out with a track. So for example, it's just a normal kick, bass, melody, and hi-hat like we have here. And while you're doing it, it sometimes can be that you kind of lose touch with your mix and your kick doesn't cut as much through the mix as when you started out, because you're adding all these new elements. So one of the things that I like to do is we do the same as we did with the sample selector. So I go to my project, I have a kick here, just a normal kick. Go to sampler, and we're going to load in all these 55 kicks again. Go distribute ranges, so now I can scroll through these kicks. And now I have kind of what we've had with the hi-hat in the beginning. I've created for a kick. So it's nice if I also play it. Let me quickly map that to one of the macros. So now, this is nice, but what I like is to actually put a EQ on it. Yeah, it looks like I have no plugins on this computer, and that's true, because in my studio I use an iMac to produce music. This is just for if I have to do a live set during gigs, and I try to not use any external plugins, to be honest, just out of stability. But this is by far, I think, my favorite plugin in the world. It's the EQ Pro Q from FabFilter, really good. And, oh no, I need a low cut. So what I like to do is cut down all the low end of my kicks. And just keep that top edge that you hear here. And now if I scroll through, I have only this top transient of the kick. And what I like to do is then load it in here. Oh, this is the new Ableton, by the way. You can do groups within groups, Ableton 10. Everybody check it out here at the Dancefair. It's a really good upgrade. And one of the things you can do here is make groups within groups. So I have my kick bass, but I also have this group where I have the kick and the top kick that we just created. So clean your projects, that's also always nice. So now we have our kick, and I'm going to slowly put that top transient in there. And now when I turn it off, you'll definitely hear that's missing. And so without a lot of hassle, we really brought our kick back to life. And of course, you have to hear this in the mix. So and you can even select different ones. And this way you can really, without a lot of tweaking, because you can go into your sample and change the attack or put a transient designer on it to make it cut through the mix. But this one, for me, it was a very quick, effective tool to slowly improve your kicks while you're in the mix without too much of a hassle.
And would you normally use like that four sound setup for your kicks?
Come again?
Would you normally use that 4-channel setup for your kicks? So you'd use 2 kicks, work it, sub, and then with your top transient on?
No, sometimes I would just have 1 kick, because then if it just fits in the mix perfectly, then I'll just keep that. So it doesn't always is the case, but sometimes while I'm in the process of making music, and you can be 5 hours in your production, you can see like, my kick isn't as powerful as when I started out. And then this way you can tweak it a little bit. Of course, there's 100 ways how you can improve your kick. I'm not saying this is the trick, but if I have to show you some tips that can help you quickly, then I think this one is something that will really work for you. So yeah, top kick, and now in Ableton you can put, now it's not as cluttered anymore in my mix, so I have my kick and my bass. I can even use this as an input signal for my sidechain, for example, while it's actually consisting out of 2 samples, so 1 top kick and 1 normal kick. So that's one that I think is really good. This is also good. So one of the things that I like to do, and I think a lot of people like it as well, is have also a shaker in my productions. So what I've done here is just a normal straight 16 bar, and I loaded in a simple hi-hat, nothing fancy, just some normal hi-hat, and it sounds like this. Let me select here. Just actually not that sexy. And I'm kind of missing the control over this shaker sound. So what I like to do sometimes is you have the vocoder in Ableton, and the vocoder is normally what you use for if you want to sound like Daft Punk or we want to create like a more of a synth-based vocal texture. But you can also load it in on percussion-based instruments, like for example this hi-hat. And what you can select here is you can do pitch tracking, modulator, external, but you can also just load in noise. Well, most hi-hats are also just white noise, created in a certain attack, decay, sustain, and release setting that it sounds like a hi-hat. And if I use this release that you see on the bottom right, I can control the texture and the sound of that hi-hat and keep pressure in my track. So for example, now it sounds like the hi-hat we had, but I can... So if I put that in the mix, and then what we even can do is we can load in LFO. This is, by the way, it looks new because it's from the new Ableton version. And we can map that to this release. So now you can create grooves with this LFO. And now I can even use this in my arrangement. So if I sync this to, for example, 8 bars, it will slowly turn this release up while we're playing the track. So it will build tension and you can play around with that. So And as you can see, that can really build pressure in your tracks. And if you then move around with your reverbs and your low cuts, then a simple hi-hat that was in the beginning not as useful, you can now use quite effectively. And if you want, you could even add another LFO to it. And for example, put this on, let me see what they have. Oh, here, random, for example. And put the rate a little bit higher. So every time we'll take a new setting, and you can select that, for example, to map that to the depth of this track. So now it will go up, like you see here, but still has a little bit of alterations every time it goes up. So as you can see here, it now goes up, but it's still switching around a little bit. And that goes kind of what I was saying about that analog flavor. I'm not saying this is analog, but it gives, every time it's a little bit different, and therefore, if you make techno, it can be quite repetitive, and you don't want it to sound boring every time. So these kind of like subtle details can really, at least in my opinion, help me with my productions to really get them to that next level. And you can do this on attacks, on decays, on releases, and just tweak it a little bit. You can do it even on synths and use it on the D-tune, for example. So it sounds like your lead is not always exactly spot on, but also a little bit different every time. Am I going too fast, by the way? I'm way too excited to tell everything.
Would you also possibly use that live? Would you kind of?
Yeah, you can use that. Well, it depends on when I play live. I don't like to bring in a lot of internal synths because I don't want to put too much pressure on my system. But definitely you can use that for example, vocals, and then put it on the delay and then change the delay times. And so every time when you slowly put in an effect, it's a little bit different, because sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but if you use the filter or the delay on your Pioneer mixer, it sometimes can be that when you're at a party and you hear this DJ always use the same effects, you're like, okay, he's doing the same trick again and again. And with these kind of tools that you can use in your live sets, for example, you can add some randomness. So.
Do you also print that? Like, do you freeze it?
You can. Now I don't, but if you go to maxforlife.com, there's a lot of cool plugins like automation recorder, and then it will record this randomness, and that is of course good if you, for example, you render out your whole track and you want to send it out to a master, and he says, oh, you have to tweak something, you don't want to have your whole track sound completely different the next time you want to add something to it. So then I use a tool on Max for Life. It's called Automation Recorder, I think. And then you can record this randomness in your automation pattern. So it will come in here. Because if I now record this, I don't think it will record it, to be honest.
You freeze the audio as well.
Yeah. So. Let me see. Okay, this one is, well, the same as we had with the kick before. Sometimes I think that when I'm producing, I have to refine my mix. And for example, we've created this loop, and my hi-hat that we had in the beginning, I think it doesn't really fit in the middle anymore. I needed it a little bit more to the sides. And one of the things that I like to do is use a Haas effect. It's a quite famous technique. And you can build it yourself, actually, in Ableton. You can also get it on Max for Life. But if you go to your standard plugins, at audio units, at Apple, you have this tool called the AU sample delay, audio unit sample delay. And what it does, it will delay your sound with a couple samples. Well, that's not that special in itself. But if you then duplicate this chain, and I move this around, so now I have the same channel playing the same sound, but I'm going to delay one of these channels with a sample delay. You hear that it creates an echo. But if I then pan one signal completely to the left and one signal completely to the right, and do this to roughly 200 samples, it will create a gigantic stereo field. Okay, I knew this wasn't going to work here, to be honest. I don't know if you can hear it, but this really helped me with my percussion to get it very wide sounding. So you have to keep it roughly under 200 samples. And they also have this in Logic. It's just called the Logic sample delay. And you just tweak one of the channels a couple samples later, and it will create a huge stereo field. So it really helps. I don't know if you can hear it here, though, but definitely try it out when you're at home in your studio. Oh, it's in mono. Oh, then it doesn't even work at all. I'm sorry. Okay, let's do some other sounds. So one of the things that I like to do is, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes you're playing with a lead melody that you really like. For example, this is my lead, and I think, yeah, that's quite good. But I want to have it, I want to put a bass line under it, and that has to follow the same melody. So what I've done here is I've loaded in just your simple operator and a standard plugin in Ableton. And it comes, this sound, if you're wondering, is Upward Flight. It's the new plugin in Ableton. It's called the Wavetable. Pretty cool so far. And so I've loaded in a simple sine wave. And what I then like to do sometimes is just play my melody and use the input of that MIDI, of that lead, in my bass. So, and now it just plays the notes that I've programmed here in my bass. thing is, the bass line, as you can hear, is only powerful in the lower octaves. And my melody is going through a couple octaves, like 3 octaves, C2, C3, here in the 3rd octave, in the 4th. So I've built this, I called it Bassline Mono. And it's consisting out of 2 plugins that you can get from maxforlife.com. It's called the Mini Monopoly and the MIDI Wrapper. And what I can do is I can say here in the wrapper, I want all these bassline notes that we have here, I want to put them in 1 octave. So it keeps power in the whole, in those lower sub-frequencies that I want, but it doesn't move the notes different from the melody that I have. And this one, the Monopoly, is that if you, for example, play chords, this thing makes sure that your bass line only plays 1 note, so the bottom one of that chord. So now if we play this bass, now you hear it's not as powerful in every note, but if I turn it on, it has bottom end for every note. And therefore I can play around in my with my melodies and still have that bass line follow whatever melody I play. So now I want to do a different melody, for example, the one that I have here. And now I know this bass line will follow in exactly the notes that I want without losing that bottom end power that you want for your sub basses. Or something else. And that way I can always keep my bass line following, but still keeping that low end that you want if you want to build a good bottom end in your tracks. Then if you combine this, for example, with the other techniques that we just discussed about how you put your kick in the mix, this can really help you shape your track very quickly without too much of a hassle. So I think, I have still a lot of things I could discuss, but I think there's maybe also questions from the audience that you might want to ask. Is there anything people want to know? In the back over there.
One second.
The last trick you showed, I'm not working with Ableton, but with Bitwig. But
yeah.
Do you know a fast trick where you can do it with other DAWs?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, with the Bitwig, you can use. They have something like transpose, so you can use something that here they have it in the media effects as well. Just use your transpose button and transpose it down. But I know in Bitwig they have something like a MIDI filter, and there you can say, okay, I only want to have notes within this certain region, so it is replicatable. And I don't have Bitwig on this laptop right now, but I can look it up for you. So if you just send me an email or something on Facebook, then I'll look it up. But it's definitely possible. I would say it's harder for the other. I don't know how to do it in Fruity Loops, for example, but in Bitwig. That's the thing I like with Bitwig. You can really build all the ideas in your head, but the thing is I wasn't making any music when I was in Bitwig. I was always puzzling and playing around with the techniques.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
In which key did you produce this track in?
I'll be honest, I didn't. So this looks like a B minor or something, or I wouldn't know, to be honest. It is. I was just trying to get these ideas quickly out there to produce a tutorial, but most of the time I start with my kick and my bass line, and then it is very important that you make sure that those harmonics don't fight in the lower end. It's something that I cannot show on these speakers, unfortunately, because it's quite a nuanced technique. But if you don't have good speakers, you can always use, well, I can show you something. Oh wait, that's not your question, kind of the low end. It was more, your question was on...
Okay, thank you.
sorry, but no, to answer your question, I didn't particularly produce in a specific key. But
Okay,
it is good to keep that in mind when you're producing music.
Any more questions for Robert?
You mentioned that you're using 3 different DAWs.
Yes.
Why?
Well, the thing was, I first started out with Logic, which in my opinion is still a killer production workstation. But then I was doing a lot of collaborations with Rob Hess, a good friend of mine. And we were always rendering stems from audio, which was kind of a hassle because I was making in Logic, send them over to him in audio stems, and it was just a beast to do that. So after a while, I was like, okay, fuck it, I'll switch to Ableton because you just have to figure it out for after a while. But I must say, yeah, the best one I think is Bitwig, but it's just very focused on experimentation and playing around. If you just want to make tracks, then I definitely suggest you start with Logic or Ableton. And yeah, they're both really good. They just both had a killer upgrade. So yeah, there's not one better, I would say. Now that I'm also using Ableton for my live sets, so it is nicer that I can also produce in Ableton. In Ableton, yeah.
More questions? Yeah.
One more question over there.
So you mentioned the HERTZ effect. I like the effect, but is there a limit to how many times you use it? Let's say hi-hats, shakers, claps. Doesn't it fuck up the stereo?
Yeah, you're right. That's I wouldn't use it on leads or basses sounds, for example. I would always recommend to keep your low end at 230. It's actually really cool that for the people who have Ableton, they've updated the utility tool, which is really simple. And if I go here to my kick and bass, you can make it mono, but you can also select how far you want to put it in mono. So now I can say roughly, okay, 230 hertz is what I like to have in mono. But if sometimes your basses can be quite stereo, then you know that the top end is still kind of stereo. But the HERTZ effect is, if you put your signal in mono, it can kind of mess up your sound. So I would only do it on percussion-based stuff. I wouldn't do it on vocals. I would only do it on hi-hats, maybe snares, maybe I would do it on rides, I would do it on shakers. But don't do it too much. Yeah, and you can also just pan your sound. You don't necessarily have to do it with a HERTZ effect. Yeah, that's basically a couple of the topics that I want to discuss. If you want to see more, make sure to subscribe or listen to my music here on www.laat.live. And if there's no other questions, thank you very much for coming.
Bravo, sir, bravo. Thank you very much. Lights, please.